Hello everyone, welcome to Alastair Greener, Generationally Speaking, the podcast which looks to bridge the generation gap by debunking some myths, tackling stereotypes, and also hopefully giving you some practical tips on how we can build stronger intergenerational contacts and connections. So today we've got a good friend of mine actually who I've worked with over a number of years, and we met because we both have been doing some work in schools, helping young people to communicate more effectively with their public speaking skills. And Claudette and I got chatting, and we suddenly realised this would be a great topic of a podcast, and all will be revealed as we go along. But anyway, first of all, tell you a little bit about Claudette Dawson. She is an educator. She helps with not just with young people, but also with adults to help them communicate more effectively. Claudette, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Alastair. Thank you.
We've got lots to talk about because one of the things we're going to tease people with already is the fact that you were at one stage were living in a household with 5 generations.
Indeed.
Which was, I think, is absolutely fascinating because it's something that doesn't happen as much these days. And it's just a great observation. So I'm dying to get your take on that and how you all got on and what you all did and how you sort of muddled through and everything. And also to talk about the differences between the way you work with adults and the way you work with youngsters because of their generational differences. But first of all, just tell me a little bit, and for our audience, a little bit more about you and the work that you do, and maybe something that's maybe a little bit different about the way that you approach communication training.
Well, great start already. Here we go. So I've had the joy of delivering in a number of different establishments, as you've mentioned, anything from schools, colleges, universities, and of course, adults in the workplace. I truly appreciate the space that we're in, yet it's very, very clear that it's never a one-size-fits-all. I mean, we all know that communication is never a one-size-fits-all, but I'm understanding more and more, because of having the privilege of working in lots of different environments, that the angle does seem to be different in different scenarios. So, for example, I was delivering a session with managers in the workplace, and it was all about respect in the workplace, diversity, inclusion, etc. And the very question we asked was, what does respect look like to different generations that may potentially be in the workplace? And it was fascinating. Clearly, we're not pigeonholing to say each generation works the same, but it was fascinating to appreciate that very word means different things to different generations. And so based on the information that came from that activity, I had this cha-ching moment of, I've got to do something with my communication as well when I'm in different environments. So I've been just learning and embracing really. And as I'm delivering and being an educator myself, clearly I'm being educated too. So I think it's that openness to be able to pivot and flex and flow based on the needs of your audience at that given time.
Yeah, because actually, when we think about the language we use, the style that we use, the level of engagement and things, that differs from audience to audience. And you know, as you say, you're talking all the way through the whole spectrum of generations. What are some of the things that you're consciously aware of doing when you're communicating with those different generations?
Great question. Well, immediately this comes to mind just yesterday in the house. So, for example, I'm very clear that if I'm communicating, if I use my household for an example, so I have a 21-year-old, I have a 25-year-old, and I have a 17-year-old in the house at any given time. And I don't want to pigeonhole the numbers, but I'm very, very clear that if I'm speaking to one particular son, just be direct there and then, just get to the point. The moment I start to, because I want to explain and make sure it's understood, you can see their eyes glazing over and the blood draining from their face. So I'm very clear that I've got to get to the point quite quickly. And even if I'm explaining something, to explain it in a very quick way. Whereas I appreciate if I've asked one of them to show me something or my husband might ask them to show them something on the iPad or whatever, you know, they're like, ding, ding, ding. And I'm like, they've got to slow it down for us. So, I mean, that's just a basic example, but I'm very mindful that things need to be communicated in quite a precise and quick way. It, as they would say, it's too long. So try not to make things too long for them, in my opinion.
Actually, we something we haven't done yet is actually to talk about your generation. So first of all, what generation are you, and do you identify with the accepted view of your generation? Do you identify with that, or do you see yourself as a different generation?
I am Generation X. I'm Generation X, born in the 70s. And I guess definitely there are some principles that I allude to, for sure. What I think I'd like to say is I purposely find myself wanting to push myself out of some of the, maybe if you want to use that word, stereotypical things that may be expected of a Gen X, in the respect of, I really do want to appreciate the different generations and how I can liaise, but more importantly, how I can learn from them. So, for example, when I'm in the training room with regards to younger people, the very first thing I say is, I am not here because I'm the best communicator. Because what I find is younger people appreciate when people are really honest and actually quite vulnerable. So I'm letting them know that, yes, I might be at the front of the room, but it doesn't mean I've got everything sorted. I'm still learning. And I also make sure that the position is that I'm facilitating the learning because I can learn from them as well. So I appreciate some Gen X's might be, no, I'm the leader and I'm going to do it this way and so forth. But I actually like to change my style so it's more facilitative. And they appreciate that we are all learning from each other, which I genuinely believe is the truth.
And it's interesting. I really like that thing you were saying about, recognising where the students are and what their perceptions are, but also how that's helped you as a Gen X to understand what the stereotype of the Gen X is. That they're very, they've got it all together. They're strong, they're resourceful, all those kind of things, and to almost take a step back for you to be somebody different. But reflecting on your own upbringing, because you were born in the West Midlands, and obviously, as you say, in the 70s was a very different era to what it is now.
Mm-hmm. Very, very different. And of course, born to Jamaican parents who actually came over in the 60s. And so, of course, I was the youngest. I am. I am the youngest of 5, and I have a brother and sister still in Jamaica, but I have an older brother and sister here. So again, even the dynamics of the household, as I look back now, clearly I had other generations that I could look to, with my brother and sister being 6 and 8 years older than me. But of course, I mentioned being born to Jamaican parents, so we've got the whole generation piece, but we've also got the cultural piece as well happening in the household. So from a Jamaican perspective, and again, not stereotyping, there are very clear, traditions and things that we were brought up with in the household. And I'd love to say that I have adopted those and shared them with my children as well. And we had a conversation the other day, and they were saying how they wouldn't change anything, anything from the food that we've been brought up with, or some of the work ethic that my father and mother had that I then gave down to my children. It's that sort of thing, really. But it's a whole mixture, really. If we talk about an ingredient, it's a whole mixture of things happening in the household.
I'm really fascinated by one of the things that I talk about with my clients is what I call the 5 circles of generational influence. So in other words, you have commonalities as a generation, but you drill down, and the first one being where you are worldwide, and it drills down smaller and smaller and smaller to the fact that identical twins of the same generation clearly are not the same personality. So we've got to always take, everything with a little bit of a pinch of salt. But I'd be interested to see the difference between the members of your family who came to the UK versus the ones who stayed in Jamaica, and whether you've noticed any real differences generationally because of their thinking. Because for them being brought up in Jamaica, they would have thought that their circumstances, their environment would have been very different to yours as a Windrush generation family in Birmingham. Is there anything there that you now looking back and you look at them as personalities and the traits that they have versus what you have? Has there been differences because of your geography?
That's a very interesting question, and I'm literally trying to pick up on.
Put you on the spot there, didn't I?
Yes, yeah, but it's a great question. It's a great question because I'm thinking about my older brother and sister, and you see, I'm leaning more towards potentially the innate attitude and characteristics of just thriving and never giving up. And I see that in both my brother and sister that are still one has moved, my sister has moved to the States now, but that forever being tenacious and that element of being resilient, I see in them as I see in us here in the UK. That's a really interesting question with regards to geography. I'm guessing because we've still kept quite a lot of our traditions from my parents here in the UK, and we travel back to Jamaica and spend time in that environment as well. I'd say that I've seen a real clear difference. The drive, as I said, and the resilience and the tenacity is there in both sets of my siblings, but I can't see anything different.
Because obviously you would have had the fact that you were brought up by the same parents. Okay, you then split up. But obviously, if you look at Jamaica at that time, was a newly independent country. You had a lot of things going on culturally in Jamaica, and then there was you in the United Kingdom. Settling into a very different world. But maybe it would manifest itself more with your kids and their cousins. Do you see much differences there between, because they're both Gen Zs, but Gen Z in Jamaica and Gen Z in the UK?
Actually, that is a very good question, because I know that for myself, so if we take me and my cousins from Gen X, we were brought up in the respect of, every sort of summer holidays, either I would go and spend 3 weeks with them, they would come and spend 3 weeks. I remember my uncle cooking groceries and bringing them over to ours, and we'd really spend quality time with each other, playing outside and all sorts of stuff, which I appreciate. It's not to say that our children then don't spend time, but it looks very, very different. So we literally, weekend for weekends and school holidays, would spend a lot of quality time with each other as cousins. And I noticed that as the generations, as we then had our children, it's more that they, not to say that they don't spend time, but it's more on special occasions. They themselves are actually doing more to spend more time with each other now. But that is definitely a big thing that I noticed that was different. As soon as you asked me the question, I thought, yeah, I can definitely see how different that is. And that may well be based on, I've got this thing called a mobile phone that I can sit in my room and talk to you on Snapchat or whatever it is. And so the dynamics may well be different, how they connect and communicate. But for us, it was good old being in each other's space and each other's houses.
And talking about being in each other's houses, I want to talk about this 5 generations in one house, because that is unusual. Historically, we'd have seen that far more, less so nowadays. And I can't think there's many people who'd have 5 generations in one house. How did you cope generationally, given all of the differences that you had? And what tips would you say that you've learned from 5 generations being together that actually those of us who struggle with just 2 generations in the house could learn from?
Well, luckily for me, and I remember delivering a session and then coming home, and hearing somebody say something. And, you know, when you have those ching light bulb moments, literally in the middle of my living room, I thought, I'm actually surrounded with different generations speaking differently and having different expectations. And I just had that ching moment. And then for me, I'm very much a reflector. So what I would do is I would reflect on the needs of the person receiving the communication. I, as a Gen X, may want to communicate in a particular way. As mentioned before, I've realised that if I'm communicating with a particular, person in the household, they need it in a particular way. But of course, I was also my father's carer, who is from the silent generation. So I had to make sure that I adopted and really explained things really slowly, as well as taking a leaf from the younger generation and also getting to the point. Because if I laboured the point too long, he would lose the sense of what I was saying. So in the household myself, I appreciated, communicating with my dad, things I needed to be a little bit more slowly, taking time to explain things, as I would want them to do with me, who are from, the Gen Zs or any millenniums. But I think what I found a big thing for me, and I'm just speaking personally for myself, I realised that because of our unconscious nature and some of the things that we would expect, I realised very quickly that if I felt for any reason that I was going to make an assumption in my communication, I should slow down and ask a question instead. Because what I found myself doing was assuming that you did that or assuming that you did this, when actually, do I know that to be true? No. What I should do is ask the question. So that was a big learning thing for me, because I really
loved that, because all of us could do that, whether we're young, with old, vice versa. Because one of the challenges with generational communication is this whole assumption thing. You're old, therefore you think like this. You're young, you therefore think like this. And and just taking that step back is such a really valuable idea. Really, really love that. One of the things we often see is the extremities of generations often get on really well together. So you find the really young and the really old. So for example, in my community, there's a care home and the local school goes in there, every term, and they have an amazing time together. One of the biggest friction points we see at the moment, funny enough, is between millennials and Gen Zs. It's that next door generation. What are you seeing there, in your household and maybe within work, where that's happened? And have you been able to somehow smooth the waters between them?
Well, interestingly, for myself, it's more in the workplace I'm seeing some of the friction, appreciating that people are at different stages. So if we appreciate that, argument's sake, millenniums may well now be thinking, and again, this is not pigeonholing all millenniums, obviously, but, thinking about settling down, potentially having families of their own, etc. and so forth. So for me, it's not just about the communication, it's appreciating where people are in their story that they call life. And so what you can see sometimes when I'm delivering a session and I've got a mixture of all the generations, is that the appreciation that the millenniums may want to well be settling down a little bit more, still have their fingers in a few different pies, etc. But it's the appreciation of work ethic and what that means. And that's always a big conversation as far as I can see in the realms of the workplace, because it can mean different things to different people. Even the word retirement means different things now. And so I think some people's expectations of work ethic may well be very, very different now. And I see that time and time again in the workplace and the generations.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's about, I guess, people's priorities where you are in life, isn't it? As you used to have highlighted it there, where you've got millennials who are, again, generally, and we put that caveat in all the time, that generally they're looking more to maybe settling down and, you know, taking on more responsibility perhaps. And then you get youngsters straight out of university or straight into their first job, and they're just wanting to enjoy life and just crack on, and they've just got a very different perspective, and it's having that understanding of each other and where you are in your journey. And we sometimes, do you find that we sometimes forget where we were at that point when we were there? We sort of almost frame it with where we are now, and we forget, no, we were there not that long ago.
Yeah, that's a very, very well, not that long ago for some of us for sure. But also, what I've added to that equation is, when I was your age, the world looked slightly different. I mean, it's still a great world as it is, but the opportunity. So, for example, you know, the opportunities of travel. I was having this conversation the other day. I've always travelled back and forth to Jamaica, of course, where my parents have come from, and, you know, having the odd holiday with the children. But to think that the world is so much more accessible now, that you could actually travel, and as long as you've got your mobile phone or your iPad or your laptop, that you could be physically working somewhere else. We didn't have that when we were their age. So I do appreciate that, yes, oh my gosh, when I was younger, we were a little bit more, but also the world looked a little bit different. So, for example, my son in this moment in time is on the other side of the world. Now, I would have loved to have thought that I could do that at his age, but actually I'd already had him. So, and it's not to say that I couldn't travel with the baby, but I think we also have to appreciate that the world has got it's still big, but it's got so much smaller at the same time. And I think that's an important equation that I've learned to add to my thinking as well. It does look
Let me ask
very
you this.
different.
Did you how often did you have the phrase thrown into you, oh, when I was your age, and you said to yourself, well, I'm not going to say that when I'm a parent and I'm older?
Alastair,
And
if I had £1 for every time that was said, well, I would probably be travelling the world right now on just that money. But you find yourself saying the very things that you thought, you then start to say the same thing. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Or you might tweak a few of the words, but it's the same context for sure. For sure, definitely.
Yeah, it's always difficult, and it's likewise in the workplace. It's exactly the same thing, isn't it? People tend to frame the work by their own experiences and forget that the experiences of people coming into the workplace now are very different. And I'm just aware of time here, and we haven't really talked much about the workplace. And you know, when you and I both work with youngsters, and we're preparing them sometimes for work with interview techniques and stuff like that. I'd like to maybe split it very quickly if we could. First of all, in what advice do you give to youngsters to help get them into the workplace so they understand what they're going to go in for? So what advice do you give them? And then likewise, what advice do you give to the employers and people in work for these youngsters coming in so that they can actually have a smoother connection and relationship?
Right, so first being with the young people, it's vital that they appreciate, I think, based on, as you know, we travel up and down the UK, and you can see different needs in different areas. But for me, what's really, really important is that young people do understand, especially those that think they don't have something to contribute, that you do have. So the conversation of what are the things that you've done, haven't done anything, I don't know, and they think they've got nothing to give. Now, if they are projecting themselves from that position, they've already put themselves on the back foot, so to speak. So I like to have conversations that tease out that actually you're already using skills in the things that you do day to day, whether that's skills at home or a hobby that you've got or whatever. Sometimes they think if they haven't done a big thing, then they don't have any skills to give. So the very first thing I like to do when I'm having conversations with young people who may be thinking like that is to tease out the things that they actually have got, so that they appreciate,
because
yes,
actually
I have got
that's one of
something.
those.
Yeah.
That's one of those misconceptions, isn't it? That older people look at Gen Z and think, because they can put on a bit of bravado, and I think social media helps them put on that bit of bravado, that they actually forget that a lot of Gen Zs don't have the level of confidence that they think they might have.
That's right. That's right. And in certain areas, absolutely. But the question is, how do you then take that same, level of confidence and bring it to the workplace, bring it to the interview? When does the interview even start is a question, because of course we might think, okay, it's when I've sat down in front of the person. Well, no, it's even in the car park, it's the very first conversation you've had. It's probably even your social media, let's face it, because organizations do at times Google you. So you've got to understand that you're creating a brand, whether you know it or not. And so I think having that conversation and teasing things out of them can be really helpful. And then the opposite question, the opposite question in the workplace is actually, I'd like to say, batting back a question, because sometimes, not all, sometimes adults in the workplace can think, youngsters coming into the workplace, but actually you and I know there's some great young people with great skills wanting to come into the workplace. So the very point about keeping all assumptions, judgments and all the rest of it to one side and literally allowing people to be their authentic self and nurturing them is really, really important in the workplace, I believe. So that's the angle that I like to tend to communicate with adults in the workplace.
And it's also really interesting, the onboarding process is more critical now than it's ever been, I think, for youngsters when they're coming in, that they are looked after in that beginning stages where expectations are set. And sometimes, are you finding that some Gen Zs need sometimes the guidance of what the job entails to be a little bit more literal, that you can't just assume that they've picked everything up, that they get everything that you want them to do?
Absolutely. And for sure, making sure that whatever their potential learning style might be, is that you're tapping into that immediately. And again, also appreciating, for me, I'm seeing sometimes they need just a little bit more time to put those foundations in and to start feeling comfortable. What I don't think is helpful if we make quite quick judgments that, that person should be doing this by now or should be doing that. Because I've found, example, my daughter, who is now in college, yes, the first, couple of weeks or whatever. Now, wow, all over it. So again, it's just that appreciation that even though, as you said, sometimes this confidence may be seen when you're actually in the workplace, it's a whole different ball game. And so it's having that ability to pivot and flex depending on the needs of the person.
Yeah, and I think you've hit on something there, isn't it? Because we've become a more individualised society. It's very much about the individual, but the paradox is that we then make assumptions and put people in pigeonholes. But we actually need to think about people as individuals because they've been treated as that a lot through their lives. So it's really important that we kind of get that across. Just thinking in the last couple of minutes, I loved your earliest quote, and probably this is the most valuable thing to come out of this podcast, is that whole thing of, at the moment you're thinking of making a judgment or making an assumption, is to stop yourself and asking a question. Have you got any more of those pearls of wisdom with your 5 generations in the family, working with youngsters, working with older people? Any other couple of tips that you've got to help smooth the way between generations? Well,
there's another one, slightly similar, but I asked my question, what outcome am I looking for here? For me, it's what outcome am I looking for here? So, for example, I'm having a quick conversation. Yesterday, we were having a family conversation and so forth. And immediately my mind was, what outcome am I looking for here? Now, you might say, well, it's a bit strategic, isn't it? You're just having a family conversation. But no, I need to be clear. What I don't want is an argument. I don't want upset. I don't want this. I don't want that. What I want is this and this. If you keep your outcome really, really clear, more often than not, you will respond to get that outcome rather than the quick reaction that you usually do unconsciously. So the other thing that I'm mindful of is in my communication or in things that I'm doing is being really clear, what's my outcome here? So having your outcome really clear can help you with your communication as well as your steps that you're going to take forward.
Claudette, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we're recording this. Brilliant, because that's really great. So you do a lot of work, as you say, with youngsters, with older people. How can people get hold of you? Do you have any socials, website, or anything like that you'd like to share?
I am on LinkedIn, of course. You are very welcome to link in with me. I'm very open to networking with individuals or just meeting new people. No problem at all. So you'll definitely find me on LinkedIn. And of course, it's simply Claudette Dawson. And that's me.
And we will put that in the show notes as well, so everyone can get that for you. Claudette, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. Thank you so much. And we will have another podcast again in 2 weeks' time. So stay in touch and look forward to seeing you again in another couple of weeks. Claudette, thank you so much. And see you in another school sometime soon.
See you soon, Alastair. Thank you very much.